Hi, I'm John Byrne with Poets and Quants. I'm here for our Thought Leadership Series with the Graduate School of Management at UC Davis in California. I have in the studio with me today a person who deals with and researches issues that we confront every single day in the work world. Kim Elsbach, who has been with UC Davis since 1997, received her PhD from Stanford. It was actually in industrial engineering.
Yes.
Which surprises me to some degree, because you are totally a person who deals with human behavior in the workplace.
Absolutely, yeah.
And I wouldn't think that an industrial engineer would do that.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm kind of a rare bird. We at Stanford had a very interdisciplinary program. My advisor there was a straight up psychologist, PhD in psychology, who was in the engineering school. So I worked in social psychology my whole time that I was in the engineering school. Of course, I also had to prove that I could understand the engineering part, but my research from the get-go was all in social psych.
Now, what inspired you to become an academic?
My father was an academic. He was a professor in a medical school, and I just thought he had the best life. He would, you know, come home at lunch. He didn't seem to work that hard in the summer. Of course, I really didn't know what he was doing, and he was working very hard all the time, but it seemed like he wasn't. He had more of his own hours. It seemed like he was always working on cool things and really interesting students, and I just thought, wow, that's the lifestyle I want to have. I was a bit naive about it, but that was my inspiration.
And why did you choose the subject matter you did in terms of your research focus?
I was an engineer as an undergraduate. I got a job as an engineer. I worked as an engineer at Quaker Oats in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, making Captain Crunch and Life cereal. And I saw a lot of things that I thought could be done better in the work world. And I took a night class in social psychology, which I'd never done before, and it blew my mind, and I realized that people understand all of these human behaviors that don't seem rational from an economic standpoint, but when you understand social needs, emotional needs, they're very rational. And sort of a light bulb went on, and I decided that's what I want to do. I want to study human behavior and try to understand how we can motivate people better and lead them better with that understanding.
Right. You know, the first deep dive that one does as a researcher in academia is usually the dissertation for the PhD.
Yeah. What
was yours on?
I did my research, my PhD dissertation, on the California cattle industry.
Really?
Yeah, and you can imagine at Stanford when I said I wanted to do that, they were like, what? You know, we don't know anything about that here. You need to drive up to Davis. So even as an undergraduate or a doctoral student, I would drive up to Davis, come to campus, talk to people here. I'd go to Sacramento to the Cattlemen's Association and the Beef Council, and I was trying to understand how the California cattle industry overcame reputational and image issues that were pretty rampant in the beef industry as a whole. There was climate issues, you know, environmental issues, food safety issues, health issues, all kinds.
Which goes back to Sinclair Lewis.
Yes, yeah, well, yeah.
Right.
Yeah, so, but there was a book that was written in the 90s by Jeremy Rifkin called Beyond Beef that pretty much blamed the cattle industry for every ill known to man. And I was trying to understand how they were dealing with that. And so that was what my dissertation was on.
What did you come away with?
I found out that they used a combination of linking themselves to legitimate practices and policies and careful use of explanation and justification. So they never came out and denied what they were doing, but they justified it in a way that sort of showed that the ends justified the means.
Right.
in a way.
Interesting. Now, the breadth of your work has led you to explore a lot of different issues, from the impact of women crying in the workplace and the perceptions that people have of them as a result, or maybe the costs that are often hidden when people don't show up for work in a mixed workplace where people can work remotely or in an office. But of all the things that you've done, what would you consider to be your most significant?
Well, I think a lot of the work that I've done is on perception. It's all broadly related to perception. So the cattle industry was outside perceptions of organizations. With the women in crying, it was more like perceptions of individuals. But I think the most important work I've done has been on self-perception and how people see themselves and how they affirm themselves as positive, worthwhile and valued individuals. And that is related a lot to the meaning that they derive from work. And so I've studied that in a lot of different contexts, from trying to understand why creative workers really want to create things, even if they're in a commodity industry, like I studied toy designers. They want to have a signature style that identifies themselves and their work as uniquely creative. In other cases, I've studied why people who work in non-territorial offices, where they have to move offices every day, find it very hard to derive meaning in those cases because they don't get to decorate their office in a way that shows their distinction. I've also studied it in people who are members of organizations. So I found that in many organizations, the reason people join and support an organization is because of the organization's values, not necessarily their status. I did a big study of NASCAR fans, and I found that in a really large survey that most NASCAR fans perceive NASCAR as only moderately high status, so not high status, really in the middle of the status continuum. So they didn't think of that organization as high status, but it was high value in terms of things like patriotism.
Right.
And those were the values that they connected with, and that was the reason they supported. So this idea of deriving meaning as a way to affirm my own individual value and create a perception of myself that's positive is really what drives people at work a lot.
More than money.
More than money,
pay.
more than
more than vacation,
more than vacation,
more than your title,
more than your title,
more than the parking
status,
space,
more than the parking space. Yeah, it's interesting. Now, I should say, people have to have a certain level of comfort that they're not going to lose their job. If people are always in fear of being fired, then that becomes an overwhelming motivator. But as long as you are confident in your ability to do your job, then it's really about what meaning do I derive from it.
So stepping away from that conclusion, the lesson for a manager who has to lead a team is to what? Inculcate meaning in the work of the people who work for him or her.
Yeah, why are we doing this? What is the greater good down the line? Either in terms of the communities we serve, the customers we serve, the planet, and it doesn't really matter what you do. You can find some meaning in doing that. I think I learned that way back when I was working at Quaker Oats, that even a line worker who was packing boxes of Captain Crunch could find meaning in their work if they understood how important it was to the company and its ability to feed people,
right?
And create a product that was healthy or was delicious. Those are things that you could feel good about.
Yes. Now, it doesn't mean that you should underpay people and pay them psychically through meaning.
No. Right.
Okay.
Right. I would say, meaning is why people choose an organization. It's why they join. Things like poor pay, poor working conditions, bad bosses, those are the reasons people leave organizations.
Right.
So if you get them there and you want to keep them, you got to pay attention to pay and working conditions. But you're not going to get them in the first place if you don't provide some meaning.
Right. Now, another topic you've spent some time with that's very relevant for today's world, and in fact, obviously meaning is kind of universal, right? But currently, a lot of people are debating whether or not they want to go back to work, because through the pandemic, they were obviously allowed to work remotely. Mm-hmm. And there are some companies that are demanding that their employees come back. And this has become a bit controversial. There are employees in Silicon Valley who said they're going to quit rather than go back to work 5 days a week. What have you discovered in your research about that?
Well, one of the things I discovered is that you can't just, I think companies, when they put out work from home or telework or remote work setups, they were mostly thinking about logistical things like, do we have the bandwidth for Zoom, and do we have enough people in the office to justify having the office? But one of the things they didn't think about is bias and unconscious bias. And one of the things that I've studied is what we call FaceTime bias, and it's an unconscious bias in favor of people who are there, who are present. So if you have some people who are at work, especially people in supervisory roles, and they see some of their employees at work every day, they may not even know what you're doing, but just the fact that you're there every day, all day, and even better if you're there early in the morning and late at night, they have this unconscious bias that will perceive you as more dependable, reliable, committed, and dedicated. Whereas if you're not there, you are rated lower on those things unconsciously. And so if nobody's at work, it doesn't really hurt you. But if some people are at work and some people aren't, the people who aren't are perceived unconsciously as less reliable, dependable, committed, and dedicated. And that hurts you in promotions and in raises and things like that.
What about the benefits of working together face to face? I mean, that's an element of this as well. I mean, the argument that if you collide in the hall with someone and it's spontaneous, that perhaps an idea can bloom. Also, just the socialization of work creates community, and you're aligned with that community in the way that makes you more committed to it, and it's whatever its cause and values are. These are clearly benefits to showing up, right?
Right, and that's not my research, but I have read a lot of that research on, sort of the benefits of being there, both in terms of learning. You don't, if you run into people at work, you're likely to learn something from them. Just, casual conversations in the lunchroom or the break room or the water fountain lead to learning. And then the other thing is this sense of rapport, camaraderie, community that develops when you're physically together. That's harder. It's not impossible, but it's harder to do when you're remote.
Yeah, you can't go out to lunch with your buddies.
You can't.
And you can't have a drink after work and commiserate over that lousy boss you had.
That's right.
Or some dumb mistake your company made.
Right. It's and those conversations then turn into, well, how can we fix that?
That's right.
And so, yeah, there's a lot of things that are not impossible, but much harder to do when you're remote. And I think that's a challenge for us as we move. If companies are going to stay in this remote world, which a lot of them will, is finding ways to create those interactions that don't happen when you're not physically present.
Now, having spent a professional lifetime examining people and their behaviors, what have you learned about yourself?
Oh boy. I have learned about myself that I am somebody who really does value meaning at work, that I am somebody who is outspoken about it, and I feel like I've provided myself with ammunition for things that I believe, I've always believed about the importance of providing meaning to people who are at work and to valuing them as individuals. I don't think everybody would agree with me on all of that, but I've learned that I'm quite committed to those ideas. And it's sort of a happy accident that I was able to study them. I think it's the best job in the entire world to be able to study what you're interested in.
Absolutely. Before you were making a distinction between your most significant work and your most meaningful work.
Yeah.
We covered your most significant work, but what would you consider to be a more meaningful insight that you received from your research?
I mean, for me, it's been the research on crying at work. I found that to be really meaningful to me personally. I'm a crier, full disclosure, and what I discovered was literally nobody had studied crying at work. And it's sort of like that line from A League of Their Own where Tom Hanks says there's no crying in baseball. When I asked people why there was no studies of this, they said, well, there's no crying at work. People don't cry at work. And that is not true. People cry at work every day.
Oh, I've seen plenty of people cry at work.
So for me, personally, meaningfully, understanding why people cry at work, why I cry at work, and how that affects perceptions of the criers has been, for me, an eye-opener, and especially since I'm a crier myself. So it's not necessarily a good thing that I've learned this, but it's good that to know it and to pass on that there really are negative consequences for women who cry at work.
Now, you found that if a man cries at work, it's a positive thing, because obviously that man is in touch with his feelings. But if a woman cries at work, it's emotional and it's a sign of weakness. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, what we found, and I should say we didn't have enough men in the study to say anything conclusively. We just had too small a sample size.
Right.
So this is just anecdotal.
Yeah.
But anecdotally, we found in the few cases where we had men cry, they were perceived more positively. Oh, isn't that nice that he's got a human side? Oh, or wow, they must have done something horrible to him to make him cry. I mean, obviously he was justified. Whereas for women who cry, it's like, oh, there she goes, the emotional female, can't control her emotions.
And it doesn't matter what you cry over?
It does matter what you cry over. So yeah, so if there's a death in the family or divorce, something big, like that, you're seen as more justified in crying, and you're given more latitude. If you cry because you're frustrated in a meeting because you felt like you were being picked on, or you couldn't seem to get your point across, or whatever reason that you're frustrated, if you cry in that case, really bad.
Yeah.
If you yell and pound on the table, like men do often in those cases, perfectly fine. So it's there's places where it's really bad and places where it's not as bad.
Hey, Kim, that's got to really annoy you.
It is what it is. And as every single crier I talk to would tell you, once you start to cry, there is literally nothing you can do to stop it. So if you know you're a crier, the only thing you can do is leave. Remove yourself from the situation and take a break and say, we'll have to finish this later, because it's really impossible to control it. And if you didn't learn that when you were 5 years old on the playground, where boys and girls learn this, boys learn not to cry, girls don't learn that skill for the most part, it's really hard to do it when you're an adult. So
that's why I think most crying occurs in restrooms.
Yeah, yeah, because you just got to leave. Yeah, and it does happen there a lot.
Well, Kim, it's been a real pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you, John.
This is John Byrne with Poets and Quants. You've been watching our Thought Leadership series with UC Davis's Graduate School of Management. Watch out for some more.